Kerrin, who's part of the Acquired Brain Injury Transitional Rehabilitation Service, to talk to us and tell us that. And I'm also extra pleased because under our umbrella, we want to look at issues such as disability in there, but there's actually very few researchers looking at these issues, which says something in itself. So I'm going to hand over and welcome Kerrin to the podium, or the virtual podium.
Oh, Glenda, thank you very much. I'm hoping you can see and or hear me, and
Yes,
I'm going to
I can see you and hear you.
Awesome. I'm going to try sharing some slides and see if we get 3 out of 3.
Excellent. They're up on the screen.
Are they there? Excellent. Yes. I'm going to change my camera because it's changed the screen they're showing on. So hopefully we're all good. I am just really thrilled to be here today, and thank you all for having me, because I do recognise that the presentation I'm going to give will be quite different to some of the presentations that you're used to or that we've heard so far today, and very much coming from a health and rehabilitation perspective. And I just would like to acknowledge that the work I'm talking about today very much comes from part of a much bigger team presentation and teamwork that's ongoing within our service. So I'm talking about developing early vocational rehabilitation services for adults who've sustained an acquired brain injury. And hopefully you can now see the rest of our lovely research team. And that, as I said, this is not occurring in a silo. And I'd like to thank particularly Elena, this lady on the left, who's led our clinical work, and Dr. Vanette McLennan, who is from Griffith University, who's been our research partner on this journey. So coming from a health perspective and potentially recognising that not everyone else is au fait with rehab and ABI as I might be, I'm going to start by talking about acquired brain injury and rehabilitation, then talk about why this is important for our adults who have an ABI and how we can help people in returning to work, and talk about how as a service we've directly addressed these needs both in a clinical and in a research capacity, and present some client outcomes at the end. Now, I have a tendency to get a bit excited and go a bit quick, so please holler or jump in or things if I'm not making sense or if I need to slow down. Okay, so ABI, or acquired brain injury, is any injury that occurs to the brain after birth. And this might be something like a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, such as from a car accident or a fall, or a hypoxic brain injury where the oxygenation of blood and blood supply to the brain is changed, such as after maybe a heart attack or an overdose. ABI occurs in more than 11,000 Queenslanders per year. And as we know, our brain controls all functions in our bodies. So the results and impacts of ABI can be really wide ranging, and you can get changes in a range of skills, from cognitive and thinking skills to physical skills and dexterity, skills for communication and social communication, as well as emotional and behaviour regulation. And you can just imagine that if you have changes to any one or a number of these skills, as well as changes that are mild to more severe, that's really going to impact how you function. It's going to impact your independence and the level of support you need. It may also then impact your participation in the home and the community, and it can impact your relationships and how you go with your family. Not surprisingly, ABI has a big impact on productive roles, and we and my team define productive roles as roles related to paid employment, volunteering, and or study. So getting back to work, and I guess I should preface this saying that we work in a population of adult acquired brain injury, and there are different stories and different needs with people who have an injury when they're younger and are trying to transition to work as an adult. So I recognise that's there, but that's not quite who I'm talking about today. So getting back to work is really common for people with ABI, and it's a really common goal early post-injury to many, many years post-injury. But unfortunately, this is really difficult, not just in Australia, but internationally. This is a recognised area of need. Rates for returning to work post-injury are really low, with 32 to 46% of people with brain injury being able to resume work. For those who are able to get back to work, they then have a range of known difficulties in actually maintaining that job longer term. And we all know that there are quite varied supports for people with disability who want to go back to work, and particularly for the complex presentations of our clients with ABI, the support to specifically help this group of people can be quite limited. So people, as you know, access rehabilitation after an injury, and typically that's in a hospital or community setting. And the goal of that rehabilitation is to maximise people's recovery, participation and quality of life. And rehabilitation for return to work, in our phase of early rehabilitation, and we're really looking at those skills and strategies for work and improving those. We know, or we define VOC rehab as a process that enables people with injury or disability to overcome barriers to accessing, maintaining or returning to employment or a chosen occupation. But VOC rehab is influenced by the policies of our workplaces, the services and systems we work in, and the funding access people have. And this is then going to impact your access to a service that provides VOC rehab, the scope of each service of what can they do and what can't they do to assist people with these goals, and also the types of interventions that are offered at that rehabilitation level. And this is an issue that is a global issue. Here within Queensland, we don't have a dedicated public VOC rehab service specifically for adults with ABI. And we also don't have set frameworks or models or processes to guide those of us who do provide rehab in what are some of those best practice ways to work. And we know that service provision and scope can be really varied depending on which services you work for. So that's where my service comes in, ABI TRS. So we're a transitional rehabilitation service, and we're quite new. We started clinical work at the beginning of 2017, and we're a 5-year pilot project designed to see people with significant and severe injury who are leaving hospital and transitioning to home. And we see people for around 3 months. Of our clients, just under 60% have goals of returning to work. But as you can imagine, at this point of their recovery, their ability to do that can be quite varied. But given that our clients have this goal, from clients who may get there to clients who may be several years before they have developed that skill set to return to work, we really needed to find a way how we could address this consistently as a service. So our systems and processes, our formalised documentation, what did we need to be doing to provide VOC to our clients, and how could we do this in a way that was evidence-based? And we also had a remit as part of our funding to improve vocational outcomes, because as you saw earlier, they're just dreadful for people with brain injury. So we've had this very long, it feels very long, journey from a beautiful clinical project that we set up to a formal research project that we're conducting with Vanette from Griffith. So our initial clinical work really looked at how can we target this as an interdisciplinary team rehab approach. So looking at, well, what's the evidence base we have access to? What are our experiences as a team? What do our clients need? And what's the context in which we're providing services? And as a team, we go out and see people in their home and in the community. We needed to investigate VOC rehab provision locally and across the state and liaise with a range of services. We also, as a rehab service, needed to seek some legal advice from our health system as to what are we covered for when we're doing things under a rehab umbrella. Can we do a workplace visit? How do we go being responsible for developing safe return to work duties, and how was that legally being covered for us? We developed some team processes, tools and procedures that we refined along the way, and were fortunate enough we applied for a grant to develop these into a more formalised framework for how we deliver services and to formalise the evidence base. And that really dovetailed nicely into our research-based project. So this is a really simple but effective I guess this is our clinical framework of what do we do with our clients who have these goals. And eventually this ends up helping to stream our clients, and that then dictates what are the types of things we need to do as a rehab team to keep those return to work goals on track. So by and large, we would have a handful of clients who are our stream A's, who are likely to get back to work within that 3 month of hospital discharge. And really at the start, we did not think this would be a category of high need, because we're seeing people who've already had many months in hospital because of the severity of their injury. We're seeing some of the most severely impaired people across the state of Queensland. We're part of a statewide service. But we thought that, hey, there might be a group of people who are at that level to do that. But we figured the majority of our clients would likely be returning to work either up to 1 year post-injury, so they're our stream Bs, and we would also have a cohort who'd have work goals but might be needing to work for long periods of times on those skills of self-management and of being able to be independent in the home and community before they looked at that work trajectory, and those clients became our stream Cs. But we also knew how important it was to keep this goal of return to work viable for our clients and keep it on the table rather than go, oh, don't worry about that, it's a bit too early. But to actively address it, but do it in very specific ways. And you can see two of our wonderful clinicians on a worksite visit out at the Rockley markets there. So clinically, we developed a bucket load of tools and specific processes that guided how we clinically delivered our VOC rehab. This included workflow documents, specific documentation on consent to contact employers, information booklets for our clients, guides on how we'd conduct a risk assessment if we're undertaking a site visits, how we develop suitable duties plans as part of our rehab work. And all our clients, or all our likely return to work clients, have a vocational profile developed which helps future services work with them and helps their bosses when they are transitioning back to work. So you can see there was a lot of work done there as this clinical-based project we were doing and portfolio work. But having gotten that grant and developing a research-based project, we really wanted to make this an evidence-based framework and be able to say for every aspect and element we were doing, what's the underlying evidence for this? We wanted that for the processes we're using, the timing of activities, the different types of activities we're doing, and how that goes across those different groups of clients. We recognised we'd done an extraordinary amount of work clinically, but we wanted to really formalise that project and make it something that we could hopefully roll out across the state. And this was very much informed by our EBP, or evidence-based practice principles. And this EBP model, as a health practitioner, is our bread and butter. So for any intervention we do with a client, we say, well, what's the research evidence? What do I know from my clinical expertise as a clinician is what may be helpful or not so helpful for this client? What are my client and family values? What are their needs and wants and wishes? And then what's that context? So what context am I working in? Am I sitting in an office-based space? Am I seeing people at home? Am I doing only telehealth therapy? And what's the context for my client? Where are they? Where are they living? What's happening in their lives? And we took this really common model that we use in everyday practice and applied that to our research question. So we identified the evidence across these areas to see what we could add to what we developed clinically. So we performed a scoping review to investigate the research-based evidence for VOC rehab and those processes and components. We investigated the experiences of adults with brain injury who were already living in the community and had either had return to work goals or had actively returned to work. We made sure we didn't recruit clients who'd been through our service because that would contaminate it, but just to find out what were their experiences, what did they think services for that are providing VOC rehab should look like and address. And we also tried to investigate the experiences of family members or significant others of those clients and participants with ABI we recruited. Unfortunately, a common theme following brain injury is a breakdown of relationships and families, and we had 8 participants that we recruited, and only 2 of the 8 had maintained relationships with their previous partners. So unfortunately, that study 3 ended up being quite small. Our clinical expertise, we investigated our colleagues across the state. What do our health professionals feel about VOC rehab? What are their opinions? And we also sought some opinions across some health professionals from across Australia. And we put all of that together within our practice context of what can we do in those first couple of months post-hospital discharge. And we synthesized our information into a framework. Some examples of the findings we found from this that added to what we knew before is that we identified those evidence-based processes, components and activities for VOC rehab, and what the processes we could also add for a coordinated interdisciplinary team-based approach. We were able to incorporate other components from the work we do in our service. We run a number of group-based programs, we do communication training, we do partner training, we do a range of other things, and there was evidence to say some of the other interventions that we offer are useful and supportive of return to work, so we could add that to the clinical toolkit. Our consumers told us how important it was for clinicians not to dismiss a goal of return to work and to keep it on the table, and that how important education and information provision was, recognising they might not use it early in recovery, but really valued it later down the track. They also identified areas including employer contact and communication and how that could be improved. They identified a really big range of things that they liked and they didn't like about the rehab and therapy they'd received, and identified some other areas that clinicians should be doing to support them, including better liaison with other services for return to work, as well as addressing some areas that weren't related to a specific job, but supported them in reclaiming aspects of their life, such as engaging in meaningful activity, supporting them with their relationships and with their families, as well as those changes to identity that can occur post-injury. So that VOC services should possibly be doing a bit more than just the VOC-based rehab. Our clinicians were able to, from our clinician discussion, we were able to identify what current practice looked like across the state and the service delivery and scope of practice from a range of different services. This included the gaps and the barriers we have in effectively providing VOC rehab in the rehab services we have, as well as what strengths and solutions were emerging and some new processes that were coming out with the starting of services such as the NDIS and NISQ. So people were having a bit more access to private rehab, and how were transitions happening from that public to private domain. And we were able to map out across our clinicians what ideal pathways and service delivery should look like across our rehab services. And this is it's a really busy slide, and I apologise for that, but it really is our sort of frontline VOC rehab framework, or our draft that's currently being written up for publication. But it really says, well, what are those evidence-based activities and processes that happen that occur in our therapy sessions? So you can see that we have, going down the page, we've got things on assessment, processes and steps for goal setting and rehab planning, specific things that happen under intervention and in our discharge planning. And we've got this cyclical monitoring and evaluation while clients are within our service. And this is that template that really governs what we're doing, and it's based on that evidence that we've gathered. So you can see that we've had this really lovely volume of clinical work that we put some research frameworks around to develop our evidence-based framework. And that you can see that lovely synergy between what we've done in our clinical service development and in our research development. So I guess what are the outcomes? What are we finding? As you've heard, just under 60% of our clients had goals related to vocation. And of these, just under 12% of that group actually returned to work during our rehab program. That surprised the heck out of us, I have to say. A much bigger cohort were predicted to return to work in that longer time frame. And if we think of nearly of all the clients we see in our service, including those who don't have vocational goals, just under 7% are going back to work within 3 months of hospital discharge. We're also having feedback from the services that we feed into and that take clients after us, that our transitions have improved for clients with vocational goals. Our clients are more work ready and their ability to engage in ongoing VOC rehab has improved versus prior to us doing this work. And that for some services that are taking on clients that may not be as experienced in or is specialised in providing ABI and VOC rehab services, that vocational profile and plan that we develop for our clients, we can hand on to them to help guide their next steps and continue to give our clients a great service. And I think not more importantly, but also within our service of ABI TRS, we know that regardless of who you see across our team, which speech therapist or which occupational therapist or which psychologist, it doesn't really matter, because with the framework and the processes we're developing, we're providing a real approach to VOC for these clients and to VOC rehab. And that we really do think we're providing meaningful rehab for our clients with return to work goals. Now, I'm quite sure I've done my 15 minutes, but I'm going to take 2 minutes of questions to go through a really lovely client example. This is from our latest service newsletter, and I'd like to introduce you all to Craig Chicken, who is a young man who came through our service. Part of our service being a statewide service, we have accommodation options for clients to stay in who live outside of Brisbane. So he was staying in one of our houses down here in South Brisbane, and he was a labourer and his goal was to get back to work. Now, this was a man who had not engaged well in hospital rehab. He could sit down for about 2 minutes at a table-based task, and then he'd lose attention. And the referring team possibly didn't give him a great, not chance with us, but were a bit hesitant in what they thought he might achieve following hospital. But Craig just surprised everyone. It was beautiful. And we had this lovely team-based approach to him working on his VOC rehab, that we had his speech pathologist actually identified this project he wanted to make, a type of container or storage unit. And to do that as a labourer and woodworker, we needed to assess his safety on a range of different tools, which our OT did. Our physio was involved in looking at, well, how can you do this safely without aggravating your shoulder injury? We had allied health assistants who actually went and took him down to Bunnings to buy the materials and help facilitate him going to the men's shed to use some tools. So we had a very big team-based approach, and he was doing this as his rehab program rather than sitting at a table doing tabletop tasks with us. And as you can see, there's Craig and his dog and the finished storage unit there. But what we saw was that Craig's performance during his rehab in the context of a work-based task was so different to what it was in a tabletop activity with us in a therapy room, and that his attention, his concentration and his monitoring for safety were all quite adequate and very good during those tasks that he was doing for woodwork, but were just dreadful down in the therapy room. But we could actually see that he would be safe on a work site for short periods of time. And he actually ended up going back to work and doing some casual labouring while he was having rehab with us. And I'll end up with a quote from Craig to sum it up. I got some casual work with a friend that was really good. Good to get back into whatever's real, what's normal, and you won't get better than that. So that's it. That's how we've been looking at developing our clinical and research-based services to really help people with brain injury return to work. So thank you, and thank you on behalf of our team.
Thank you very much, Kerrin.